This is the official Sony PS1 screen. It's quite popular for modding because it's quite a good sized screen. It's just over 5 inches across on diagonal. It takes RGB, it takes composite, and the PAL unit can be modded to do S-video if you require. To take the system apart, there are 2 screws hidden under 2 small rubber pads, 3 screws which are quite visible, and 2 which aren't, which are just behind the speaker grill. If you peel it off with a screwdriver, you can then get access to those 2 screws. I've taken this one apart earlier for sake of speed. When you've done that, use a screwdriver just to pry the various parts across quite carefully, and then the whole thing will just ping apart. So to take the covers off, here you have the power. It normally takes about 7.4 volts, but it can run as actually as low as 7 volts. This is a little pad for the audio video, and of course there's the 2 speakers. They're on the 2 plugs. I've taken those apart for sake of convenience for the video, and this is the part that we're interested in for this. These of course are the 2 contrast buttons, the 2 volume controls, and that's a transformer just to power the screen. I won't be doing an LED mod. I prefer the colour of the screen to be quite uniform. I've got different ones of these screens, and some of them have got 2 capacitors, some have got 1, some have got none. They all seem to work just as well. To show a difference between the PAL screen and the NTSC format, I've got the 2 alongside each other. There are 2 slight differences. This one with the PAL has got a small LED which illuminates when the board is supplied with power. There's no such LED on the NTSC board, and this part's quite important, which is not present on the NTSC, because you can tap off one of the components here in order to get S-video if you require. You can do that with a PAL, you can't do it on the NTSC. This is one stage that we'll be doing in a short while. Basically you're just providing 5 volts onto one of the pins to make sure that the screen works to illuminate the panel. This is the pinout for the PlayStation screen. It's an image I got off the internet some time ago. It's proved to be very useful. I'm going to use 3 pins to illustrate what you need to connect to. Whether you want to connect it via composite or RGB, there are some things that are common to both scenarios. But one thing, there's the 5 volt which you need to feed to the 5 volt part of the 7805 to pin 12 on that socket. That provides power to the screen so it illuminates. You have the power to the system. It can be run of course off mains power, 7.5 volts. However, of course the usual thing is to run them off lithium ion batteries or lithium polymer batteries. Ground, of course, you can get the ground from various places on the board itself, particularly around the edges. If in doubt, use the proper pins, in which case it makes sense to use pin 2, as that's next to the mains power. The other part are the headphone. If you are not going to use a headphone and just play it through the speakers, you can connect those 3 pins together, no problems at all. If however you want to have the facility of using a headphone jack, I put a guide on my website for connecting them up, by the way. Then of course connect them onto the jack. The other parts are dependent on whether you're using composite or whether you're using RGB. For RGB, you utilise the C-Sync, which is a composite sync, the red, the green and the blue, hence the RGB. You also of course must provide a grounding from the console to the screen, again either via here or one of the pins. And for the audio for the RGB, then use pin 9 and pin 10 on that side to provide you with the audio. In contrast with composite, you just use pin 1 for the video, 2 and 3 for the audio. So there you have it. The orange are for both scenarios, the blue in this case is for the composite, and the green is for the RGB option. To make this board fit into my case, what I need to do is just to take off this top piece. Just above the transformer there's the darker green, which actually has no contacts at all on it. That part can be safely removed. And there we have it, it's done. I'll just use a Dremel to cut the top edges off, and then it just comes through. The reason we can do that is that there's no contacts on the board on either side. One more step we need to do to make this case fit with this screen is to effectively cut just above where this pink line is, so that we're cutting off the connections but we're keeping the pins. It just makes it much easier to then connect to the rest of the board. Okay, the trimming is now complete. I've cut right to the edge of the pins. I then used a soldering iron just to rub against each of the points to make sure that no pin was touching each other. Now the power goes into here. You could also feed it straight onto these little components if you need to, but we're keeping the point, so just keep that there. You'll notice now that the ground is effectively gone because it was connected underneath, so just use a drill, very lightly took off the surface, a little bit of flux attached to soldered wire onto here. That's the ground. That was the wire going from the 5 volt from the 7805 to pin 12, and that's the composite wire. There's no audio connected yet. Remember, we need to effectively either connect the 3 headphone jacks together or put it onto a jack. These of course are for the speakers, but because of the way it's been cut, all the contacts are still here. It saves us playing with the back of the board. And then lastly, the 2 speaker plugs were cut. Basically just use some wire cutters, cut through those 2 pieces, twisted off the plug, and then use a soldering iron to tin these points and to remove the parts. It is worth mentioning, whenever you do any cutting like this, run afterwards over the area with a little sanding drum, just to make sure you don't get any shorts, like any wires sort of touching from one piece to another. Any little loose pieces of metal would do that. You want the board nice and clean. To prove this is working, I put the ground connected into a plug and play game. It's quite a good one, this one actually. It's the Capcom one, and all I need to do is to put power into the screen. You'll see it light up, and turn the plug and play on, and you can see there you have your composite game. This of course is the reason for the work. There's just enough clearance for everything for this board to be nice and flat against the panel inside the case.